For better or worse, superhero movies are here to stay. What started as a novelty, a sort of burst of nostalgic childhood excitement for those of us old enough to long for the days of yesteryear, has become a marketing and box office juggernaut. It's almost gotten to the point where every other movie just seems like an appetizer to tide us over until the next installment of the Marvel or DC universes. Over these last 15 plus years, we've seen some examples of both terrible superhero movies and some truly great ones. The Dark Knight, Logan, even Winter Soldier have shown us how the ever-tired superhero genre can be rejuvenated. The thing about these movies, the ones often held up as not just good superhero movies but great movies in general, is that they aren't actually superhero movies. More or less, they're movies that just so happen to have superheroes. Let's take The Dark Knight, for example. While obviously Batman is a superhero and the Joker is a supervillain, the movie itself is really just a crime drama with super people. The Joker is a powerful villain not because he can move metal or because he's the reincarnation of an ancient Egyptian god or whatever. It's because he knows how to overpower Batman mentally and emotionally. While obviously there's a lot of action scenes in the movie, the real fighting is done during the scenes when Batman and Joker are just talking together. Joker gets in his head and does more damage than any number of guns or bombs ever could. If you boil it down, The Dark Knight is basically the movie Silence of the Lambs or Seven, just with superheroes. The story is about a literal psychopath and how he manipulates everyone around him. Imagine just for a second, if you took Silence of the Lambs just like it is, and you replace Hannibal with Joker. The A story could be Gordon interrogating Joker for help in catching some other supervillain that Batman's chasing down in the B story. The main plot of the movie would be trying to get past Joker's psychological traps to help with this serial killer or supervillain or whatever on the loose. Here, Joker would be both the main character while also being the main villain. Now, in many ways, this is kind of what The Dark Knight is, but I think if you took it all the way in this direction, you would get a pretty intense, really interesting movie. A more recent example of a superhero movie that isn't really a superhero movie would be Logan. As everyone is no doubt aware by now, Logan is not really a superhero movie. It's a classic Western that just so happens to have superheroes in it. It tells the story of a seasoned killer who has to live with the guilt and try to atone for the sins of his former life. After discovering his long-lost daughter, he sets out on one last ride into the sunset, except replace generic Cowboy X with Wolverine. Again, we see here how effectively an otherwise pretty basic story can be enhanced when adding familiar characters in unfamiliar situations. The idea of the last cowboy or the last samurai or whatever is always a popular choice, but what happens when it's the last mutant? Making Logan this way breathes life into both the Western genre and the superhero genre at the same time. A different take on a Western, a unique take on a superhero. Even Winter Soldier, which some people claim is the best Marvel movie made so far, is essentially a Jason Bourne, Mission Impossible style political conspiracy action movie. Now, some people might argue that Jason Bourne or Mission Impossible actually are superhero movies in their own way, but just like with Logan or Dark Knight, taking a familiar movie skeleton and putting on an atypical but otherwise familiar character outer shell can work wonders for both the character and the genre itself. With the success of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the superhero movie formula has pretty much been solidified, with the large majority of Marvel and DC movies following very similar plot points, very similar structure, and aside from having different characters, they all look kind of symmetrical to each other. But as the superhero comic book movie genre gets more ubiquitous, if that's even possible at this point, there will hopefully be more room for genre bending and mixing like we've seen with The Dark Knight and Logan. Movies that tell us stories using the characters, not just stories about these characters. While it's always fun to sit back and watch the large-scale CG spectacles that we see in most superhero movies, it's sometimes hard to keep interested when all the personality is thrown out in favor of explosions and high-octane action scenes, though, to be fair, everything does have its place. In the world of actual comic books, this is nothing new. There are countless examples of familiar superheroes being put in otherwise atypical situations. Instead of focusing on action directly, they tell stories of a more personal, political, or emotional nature. When comic book fans talk about their favorite story arcs or iterations of characters, most of the time they mention these offbeat, unique, one-shot comics. But for whatever reason, movie studios seem hesitant to take these perceived risks, even though most people's favorite superhero movies fall into this category. While superhero movies are more or less guaranteed to do well at the box office right now, there's always the possibility that eventually this bubble might burst. And when it does, movies like Logan and The Dark Knight will no doubt stand as the gold standard for how to make a superhero movie that isn't a superhero movie.
You know, I remember back when superhero movies were first like coming out, back when they had like Iron Man and the original, X-Men and the original Spider-Man and all that. And it was like such a novel idea because it's like, we'd seen superhero movies before, but they were, it was kind of like campy and kind of cheesy, and it was like, whatever. And then all of a sudden when CG was at the level where you could actually do like real stuff, it was like this like mind-blowing experience. It's like Spider-Man, but he's like cool, and you had like X-Men, but there was like cool, there was special effects, and it was really awesome, and like it was so cool back then, I guess, 15 years ago? And now, it's just become so... It's just regurgitating the same stuff over and over again. Like every superhero movie has the same story, has the same character arc and all that. And I mean... I get it because it's a formula. They make money. If you make it this way, it's going to sell this much. Like, it's guaranteed. But, there's those movies like The Dark Knight and like Logan, and even, like Winter Soldier to a certain degree, where it's like they took the idea of the superhero movie and they like changed it, and they sort of evolved it in a way where it's like, it's not really a superhero movie anymore. It's just a movie that uses characters that we already know. It's kind of like how Logan is a Western that uses superheroes, or how The Dark Knight is a crime thriller that uses superheroes. And it's like, those are the movies that more often than not stick in our heads, at least for me. Because when I saw Logan and I saw Dark Knight many years ago, it was like, why is this so good? Like, why is it so much better than everything else? And then you think about it and it's like, oh, because it's not a superhero movie. It's just a movie that uses superheroes to tell a different story. And it got me thinking, like, this should be a thing that happens way more often. I mean, Marvel movies are fun, and yeah, it's fun to watch people beat up each other and fight giant space worms and whatever. But like, there's something to be said where it's like, take something that exists like this, but then use it to tell this kind of story. I mean, Riverdale is a good example of how you can take something that's established and it has characters and stories and character arcs and everything already there, but you just kind of change it into a different way. Not that Riverdale is like a huge masterpiece, but it's just this idea where it's like taking something familiar, putting it in an unfamiliar situation so that we have something to latch onto, right? Like, it's hard to sort of have emotional connections to characters you don't know, but characters that we already know really well, like Logan or like Batman or Joker or whatever, take them so the emotional connection's already there, and put them in a situation where it's like, I have no idea where this is gonna go. At least for me, it's much more enjoyable that way. Alright, anyway, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, don't forget to subscribe, because I have videos coming every Friday. And of course, don't forget to follow me on Twitter for any kind of updates or, things that are going on with me or with the channel, because, that's where I do polls and I ask people what they want to see and things like that. So if you want to get in touch with me, or you want to tell me you liked it or you hated it, or you have an idea for a video, hit me up on Twitter. That's the best way to get a hold of me. Anyway, so thanks for watching, and I'll see you all with next week's video. Bye-bye.
But as the superhero comic book movie genre becomes even more popular? As the superhero comic book movie genre gets even more popular, if that's even possible at this point, that's too many P's, there will hopefully be more room for gender bending and mixing like we've seen with The Dark Knight and Logan. Wait, genre bending, not gender bending. That would be a completely different video now, wouldn't it? Let's take The Dark Knight, for example. While obviously Batman is a superhero and Joker is a supervillain, yeah, no freaking duh. The real fighting is done during the scenes when Batman and Joker are just talking. Joker gets in his head and does more damage than any number of guns or bombs ever could. This is one of those phrases that like sounds smart, but like doesn't really mean anything. After discovering his long-lost daughter, sort of, he sets out for one last ride into the sunset. Except replace generic Cowboy X with Weapon X. That's a little too on the nose. That's kind of cheesy. Let's change that to Wolverine. Replace generic Cowboy X with Wolverine. Yeah, that sounds a little better.